Well, good morning, and thank you, Ted, and good morning, InterDrone. I am delighted to be here today, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and many not so familiar faces in the crowd. And I hope you're enjoying your time here in Las Vegas and that you, like me, plan on coming away from this conference both energized and inspired by the future of the unmanned aircraft industry. When you think about it, aviation has always been about milestones, and it has always had a lot of very pivotal moments in our history. Back in 1783, it is believed that two Frenchmen made the first manned free flight. They traveled about 5 miles in a hot air balloon from the center of Paris to what were then its suburbs. Fast forward more than a century after that, and a couple of bicycle mechanics named Orville and Wilbur, you've heard of them, they made history on a windswept beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Many of us remember July 20th of 1969, when people all over the world gathered around televisions as Neil Armstrong took one giant leap for mankind onto the surface of the moon. Now, there have been a lot of landmark moments before then, during those times, and since then. And I think it's fair to say that unmanned aircraft deserve a place at this table. But the contribution of unmanned aircraft or drones hasn't occurred at a single moment, with the roar and the flash of a rocket engine, or the iconic image of a human foot sinking into the soil on the surface of the moon. But we all have to agree that drones have fundamentally changed aviation, and they've changed society as a whole. And the crowd that's here today speaks at this point. Consider that this is just the second annual InterDrone conference. Ted was telling me that the number of people attending and exhibiting this year is more than 50% higher than just last year, and as you heard from him, representing 56 different nations. Now, these are impressive numbers, and when you think about it, the rapid growth of this conference is really a microcosm of what's happening nationwide and worldwide. Now, I enjoy coming to these conferences because I learn something new at each and every one that I attend. Yes, we get a lot of work done in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters office at the FAA, but I think there's no substitute from hearing perspectives from people like you that are in the industry and that are blazing a trail for innovation in this new and emerging industry. And I'm encouraged that when we get out and talk to people, virtually everyone I talk to is approaching this new segment of aviation from a perspective of safety first. And despite our sometimes different viewpoints, we all agree on one thing, and that is that we want to see safe integration of unmanned aircraft. Now, once we realized that we had this in common, a certain level of cooperation began to take hold, and industry began to support our early integration efforts. And we realized that we at the FAA, had to change the way we do business in order to support safe integration of unmanned aircraft, but to do it in a way that doesn't snuff out innovation. And together, we have forged a relationship that is based on cooperation, upon collaboration, and based on partnerships. Now, it seems like every time I talk about drones these days, I comment on something that has just happened since the last time I spoke. And the way I see it, this affirms that this collaborative approach that we've adopted over the last couple of years is, in fact, working. When we talk about accomplishments, though, I think it's important to stress that we're not talking about something that the FAA did. And we're not talking about something exclusively that industry did. What we're talking about is something that we have done together. For example, when we first began using the Section 333 exemption process, it feels like it was the Ice Age. When we first began using that process to authorize commercial drone operations, the pace of approvals was glacial. During the first 3 months we had the program, we authorized exactly 7 operators. And not surprisingly, you asked if we could move just a tiny bit faster. So we focused on finding ways to streamline the process while still at the same time fulfilling our safety mandate. We began signing off on several dozen approvals a month, and by this summer, we routinely granted several dozen approvals every day. But I think we all know that very soon, Section 333 exemptions are going to seem as antiquated as that old Smith Corona typewriter that some of us remember from our college days. Just last week, I joined Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox to announce one of the most significant milestones in the evolution of our efforts to safely integrate unmanned aircraft into our national airspace system. On August 29th, right after midnight, our small unmanned aircraft rule took effect. Now, the rule in a nutshell, as you know, allows for routine commercial drone operations within certain limitations. And I believe it will enable innovation to flourish while at the same time maintaining the highest levels of safety in the world's busiest and most complex aviation and aerospace system. Also known as Part 107, this rule makes it easier for people to fly commercially by largely eliminating the need for operators to get case-by-case approvals, those old 333 exemptions. And it greatly simplifies the pilot qualification process and the requirements. Now, when the rule was going to take effect, we sat down with our leadership team and our communications team at the FAA, and we figured, hey, we should have a press briefing about the new rule and just talk about, hey, it's taken effect, in case you hadn't noticed. And we questioned how much interest this press briefing was going to generate. Because after all, there was no news here. We had announced the final rule a couple of months before. Most people were well aware that it was going to be taking effect on August 29th and going live that day. Well, our question was answered pretty quickly. Nearly 1,000 people watched our live stream of the event. Several dozen news reporters attended the briefing in person or listened in by phone. Even in my hometown of Park City, Utah, the Park Record, which generally writes about the police blotter or the latest speed trap on the state route coming into town, had a front page story about the rule taking effect. And so this massive display of interest really drove home the degree to which drones have captivated the collective imagination, not only of this industry, but of the public. But I want to point out that we would not have gotten an effective rule out if we had tried to do it alone. At the FAA, we know we don't have all the answers in this rapidly emerging industry. We know that we gain strength and we fashion a better product when the outcome is the result of a rich variety of very different perspectives. And the small unmanned aircraft rule is a case in point. The draft proposal, which we first published for public comment in February of 2015, for example, suggested that everyone should fly within the limitations of the rule. There would be no exemptions. Well, several hundred of you believed this was too rigid and would unnecessarily stifle innovation and opportunity. And you suggested that we needed to include a process by which people could get authorization to operate outside the basic boundaries of the rule as long as we could make a determination that such operations were safe. We agreed. And we took that suggestion and created a provision that allows people to request waivers if they want to operate outside the parameters of the rule. By mid-morning on the day the rule took effect, we had issued 76 waivers. Now, most of these were for night operations, and we continue to issue a number every day. Now, the point is, we know that when we're flexible in our approach to integration, we open up greater opportunities for more kinds of small unmanned aircraft operations. And this is important. Yes, it helps to spur economic growth, but at the same time, it enables us all collectively to develop important data, important information that will guide our future integration efforts. Now, just a handful of years ago, it would have been hard to imagine we would all be gathered here today, let alone talking about a comprehensive rule that allows people to routinely fly drones for commercial purposes. Back then, only a few thousand drones were being sold each year, and the vast majority of those were being sold to remote control model aircraft enthusiasts. Now, as we know, 4 or 5 years is eons in terms of drone development and innovation, and in fact, we now predict there could be as many as 600,000 manned aircraft used commercially in the first year after the rule is in place. And nobody is more aware of the huge impact that drones are having on industry than you are. Today, drones are providing filmmakers with a fresh angle on the world. They're giving first responders a new tool for search and rescue operations. They're improving the safety of our transportation infrastructure by inspecting thousands of miles of rail tracks and pipelines that crisscross our nation. And they're tackling jobs that can be dangerous for people or other aircraft to do, such as inspections of power lines or smokestacks. And of course, numbers don't tell the whole story. One of the most compelling narratives is what's going on behind the scene. Drones are helping to create a whole new means of realizing what we've always called the American dream. Today, many of our nation's bright young minds are captivated by the virtually limitless possibilities that are offered by the drone industry. Drones are opening up aviation to people who never would have thought of entering the field through the traditional paths. College students are pursuing careers as engineers, as computer scientists, as pilots, and even lawyers with the intent of applying their skills in the unmanned aircraft industry. And who knows what new uses for drones these brilliant young minds will be dreaming up. The only bounds on this technology are in our imaginations. Now, these limitless opportunities and the lightning speed of innovation underscore the need for us to continually evolve, to change, and to grow as we strive to achieve that balance, that perfect balance between accommodating innovation and ensuring safety. We're getting better at this all the time, and in the past couple of years, we have made progress that many believed was impossible when we first started tackling drone integration. Now, productive partnerships require participants to be flexible. They don't work if each member maintains rigid in their demands and is unwilling to compromise with a view toward achieving long-term growth in the industry as a whole. And this industry, you, have consistently demonstrated flexibility through, among other things, your support for our incremental approach to integration of unmanned aircraft. And I can't emphasize how critical this has been to our collective success as an industry. At the FAA, we realized pretty early on that we too need to be flexible, to be willing to look at challenges from different angles, and to evolve in our approach because the world around us is evolving at warp speed. In fact, we're trying very hard to stop moving at the speed of government. Now, the list of our shared accomplishments is well documented by now, and the small unmanned aircraft rule is only the latest example. So is registration. When we first announced our plans under a year ago, last October, to put a drone registration in place before the Christmas holiday season, more than one pundit scoffed at us. 2 months later, because of the diligent work of a devoted and diverse task force of stakeholders, of you, we had a fully functional, easy-to-use, web-based registration system. And now, less than 9 months later, we have more than 520,000 hobbyists who have registered to use drones. Now, it's close to 550,000 when you throw in the commercial operators. Now, to put that in perspective, we have only 320,000 registered manned aircraft on the Aircraft Registry of the United States, and it took us 100 years to get there. Now, as I said a moment ago, our partnerships support and promote both safety and innovation. And through our Pathfinder program, we're partnering with a range of stakeholders to research uses that are not covered by Part 107, particularly in operations beyond line of sight. Now, the information we get from these partners will help us in the drafting of future phases of regulations. So will the groundbreaking research that's being conducted at our unmanned aircraft test sites. And I think we can honestly say that by working together, we have made more progress on drone integration during the last year than in many previous years combined. But in reality, I think we all know that the work has just begun. Even as we were finalizing the small unmanned aircraft rule, we were already working on a number of other integration challenges. One of these is a rule on unmanned aircraft flights over people, and we plan to have a proposal out by the end of this year. We're also working on a proposal that would allow people to fly drones beyond visual line of sight. And this work is laying the foundation for more numerous and more complex drone operations. And that means we have to focus more of our energy on the bigger challenges. Challenges such as command and control, detect and avoid, aircraft and operator certification, how spectrum will factor into integration, and how frequencies will be managed and how they will be allocated. Now, to aid us in our efforts, we've established a drone advisory committee comprised of stakeholders from across the aviation and aerospace sector, and the unmanned aircraft industry, obviously, is an important part of it. And this group will help us prioritize our integration activities, including the development of future regulations and policies. The group is scheduled to hold its first meeting next week. And this group's work will be critical because, as with any new technology, unmanned aircraft bring both opportunities, but they also bring risks. One trend that we're all troubled about, both we at the FAA and our partners in industry, is the number of small unmanned aircraft sightings near and around airports or in the vicinity of manned aircraft. Despite our collective efforts to educate drone users about what it means to operate responsibly, the number of these sightings does continue to increase. This year, we've received more than 1,200 reports so far, which is more than 150 each month. Now, the FAA wants to send a clear message that operations like these are dangerous and illegal, and we've been working closely with law enforcement to identify and investigate unauthorized unmanned aircraft operations. And we've also received disturbing reports about unmanned aircraft interfering with aircraft engaged in fighting wildfires. Now, these aircraft conduct high-risk operations that have been slowed or stopped on multiple occasions because of unauthorized unmanned aircraft flights. And I think we can all agree that reckless activities endanger lives in the air and lives and property on the ground when minutes count. Now, our preference is always to educate first. We want to incorporate drone pilots into something that has characterized aviation from the very beginning, and that is the shared culture of safety, security, and responsibility. And this has been foundational in the manned aircraft industry for more than a century. If we're able to educate on the front end, we don't have to pursue enforcement on the back end. But that said, we don't hesitate to take strong enforcement action when it's warranted. And we have levied civil penalties for a number of unauthorized flights in various parts of the country and have a number of open investigations. It is worth noting that this is of great concern to Congress. They recently authorized us to levy a civil penalty of up to $20,000 against any unmanned aircraft operator who interferes with wildfire suppression, law enforcement activity, or emergency response efforts. Beyond education and enforcement, though, we need to continually other ways that we can explore safety, that we can explore security, and that we can address privacy concerns. And toward that end, we're partnering with the Department of Homeland Security to lead a multi-agency working group to assess how unmanned aircraft detection technologies can be used around airports. And we've already begun this work. We evaluated one detection product at the Atlantic City Airport this winter and worked with the FBI on developing a system at John F. Kennedy International Airport this spring. We're working with a number of other manufacturers and airports to coordinate additional equipment evaluations over the coming months. In these endeavors, it's important that we proceed cautiously so we firmly understand how these technologies interact with other aircraft, with airports, and with air navigation systems. We don't want anyone deploying unmanned aircraft detection technologies that turn out to have unintended consequences and introduce safety risks for manned aircraft. And it's important that local jurisdictions proceed with caution when they're exploring the means to control, detect, or even to neutralize drones. Late last year, we issued important guidance to states and municipalities that are considering their own unmanned aircraft laws or regulations. And our guidance explains that any local laws should be consistent with the extensive federal regulatory framework that is already in place. It also explains that a consistent regulatory system ensures the highest level of safety for all aviation stakeholders. Beyond that, it's important for local decision makers to understand that federal law prohibits destroying or endangering an aircraft, and drones are in fact aircraft under the law. Additionally, federal laws relating to electronic communication could come into play if someone were to try to intercept or jam a signal between a drone and its control system. Now, we're not just concerned about safety and security, we're also mindful of concerns about privacy. And we've been actively engaged with our interagency partners in the federal government to address this issue. We've provided support to the National Telecommunication and Information Administration's multi-stakeholder process, which is really designed to develop and communicate best practices for privacy, for accountability, and for transparency. And this initiative recently resulted in the publication of a set of best practices, which is an important step forward in addressing an issue that affects us all. Now, as part of the privacy education campaign, the FAA will provide all drone users with the NTIA's recommended privacy guidelines during the unmanned aircraft registration process and through our Before You Fly app. We will also educate all commercial unmanned aircraft pilots on privacy during the pilot certification process and will issue new guidance to state and local governments on drone privacy issues as well. Now, I like to say that integration is never going to be a finite process where one day we're going to sit back and say, okay, we're done. New minds will always be dreaming up new technologies and new uses for these technologies. Well, I'm very proud of the integration work that we at the FAA and you, as our industry partners, have done in a very short time frame. We all know that much more remains to be done. And we've been successful because we've been willing to be open-minded, to be flexible, to be respectful, and to be creative. And I think it's important to note that we have been successful not because we have agreed on everything, but precisely because we often have disagreed. Disagreement can be a source of strength, and the thing is for everyone to hear what the other is saying, especially when there are many different viewpoints, but where we all share a common goal, and we need to focus on how we achieve it. We heard you when you said we needed to add flexibility to our proposal for the small unmanned aircraft rule. And because we listened to what our partners had to say, we made this key step forward for a better product. Now, there are going to be a lot of other key steps forward in the coming months, in the coming years, and we can never stop working together to ensure that integration is both safe and efficient. In 10 or 20 years from now, it'll be fascinating to look back through the lens of an historical perspective and see what the defining moment or moments were for the unmanned aircraft industry. And for all we know, it might be something that none of us in this room can even conceive of right now. But whatever that defining moment may be, you certainly have my commitment that the FAA will always be prepared to listen and to collaborate with industry. Because together, we will achieve our shared goal of accommodating innovation while maintaining the highest levels of safety in the world's busiest and most complex airspace. So thank you for all that you do. Have a great conference.